Let's back up. Good evening, ladies, and welcome aboard. It's another week, and we are still 100% en route to good times. Here's the Hashem. We're full of faith in the Rebbeinu Shalom. He's bringing good news very soon for all those who need a Yeshua and a bracha. We're going to start off with our 3-step program, jumping right in, especially because Am Yisrael needs us to be learning Torah full of uplifted chayas, Torah that's going to give us strength to jump into times and living like Mashiach is here. I was in shul on Simchas Torah in the Heaton Park shul. Rabbi Walker, the Zayn Gesund, was talking about the importance of not getting phased, and more important to realize that whatever's going on is only closer to Mashiach than we've ever been. And it's about time we start thinking of everything that's taking place, whatever's going on, as a precursor, as the beginning, as the footsteps of Mashiach. It's harsh. It's very harsh. But as we spoke last week, nothing happens by chance. Everything's directed by the Rebbeinu Shalom. And we have to think not so much about what's going on, but we have to be thinking about what do we need to do. What everyone else has to do, they have to worry about. We have to worry about what we need to do, and this is it. We're here. We're here together. It's Monday, and we're learning Torah together, and we're going to be doing mitzvahs to the schus of all those people who need a Yeshua, a Nechama, and to the schus of the Geula, Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael. So let's start off our 3-step program. We'll start off with what's going on in this week on the calendar, and we'll go on to what's going on this week in the Parshah, and then we're looking for one practical, relevant life message from the Parshah, from this week's eternal teachings of Hashem himself, to allow us, to empower us to be able to think Geuladik, to breathe redemption style, and to make choices and make decisions and do actions that is just like Mashiach would do if he was here with us, and he is, and therefore we'll do it that way. So let's start off what's going on the calendar, starting off with today being the second day of Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh Mar Cheshvan. Cheshvan being a very interesting month in the sense that it doesn't have much on its calendar. Yom Tov-wise, there's no real highlights in the regular calendar. Of course, trust the Chabad calendar to throw some again on Chaf Mar Cheshvan. There's plenty exciting stuff. In today's Chitas, we read about the 17th of Cheshvan. Different things that have highlights, but generally speaking, it's kind of what you would call a quiet month. But in a way, that's exactly what makes it special. And this is so much how the Rebbe would talk to us. Sometimes you have highlights, or you might call them headlines. And we know that the headlines make it into the headlines because they're not the norm. They're not the average. And then you have an average day. And when we find Hashem, in the average day, that's really where it's at. Not in the exceptions, but in the regular Mar Cheshvan. And today, Rosh Chodesh Mar Cheshvan, the koyach to go into the first day of the month of Cheshvan. I mean, yesterday was Rosh Chodesh, day 30 of previous month, but it was already beginning of Mar Cheshvan. Today is full on. And we're having a full week of pure regular days. I mean, however regular means, whatever that's supposed to mean. And that's what's going on. And we're full steam ahead. We're racing forward. It happens to be that this time next week will already be after Zayin Mar Cheshvan. The 7th of Mar Cheshvan, by the time we convene next week, will have already come. And that, although it's not before Shabbos, it's right after Shabbos. On the Sunday, we're going to mention it right here. Because the 7th of Mar Cheshvan is almost something that's been brought early this year. The 7th of Mar Cheshvan is a day that the Rebbe spoke about so much. He almost created a new Yom Tov out of it. What was the 7th of Mar Cheshvan? The 7th of the month of Cheshvan was the day in which in Israel, they start to pray for rain. Now we all started praying in our Amida mentioning rain, not asking for it, but just mentioning rain in prayer. That's in the second bracha, right at the beginning. before we get into our requests, we start to praise Hashem for the fact that He makes the rain happen in its time. Masha Baruch Hamer Geshem. And in Shul, there was a whole ceremony and a whole davening, the Shemoneh Atzeres morning, for prayers for rain. But we don't start asking then. We don't start asking in the end of Sukkot. In Eretz Yisrael, they push it off an entire 2 weeks. Why do they push it off for 2 weeks? And the answer, the Talmud explains, although Israel really desperately needs the rain, urgently, but we don't ask for rain so long as the furthest travelers who would have traveled amongst all the brethren up to Yerushalayim to go to visit the Beis HaMikdash are still en route to go back home. So therefore, even though the farmers need rain, and parenthetically, the halacha is if I need something, there's a mitzvah to ask Hashem for it. So it's a big deal to forgo that mitzvah. If I have a need, then there's a mitzvah to ask Hashem for that need. Yet we put that mitzvah on hold. And we say we don't want the people who live the furthest away, they're still traveling home, to get caught in the rain and to have to say, oh, everyone else is praying that we get rained on and we have to travel and trudge through the slush and the marsh because they're davening for rain. No, we don't daven for rain even though we urgently need it. And of course, Chassidus throws into the mix and says to us, what does that mean, the furthest Jew from Jerusalem? Now, it could obviously mean geographically, and that took them that amount of time. It could also mean metaphorically. The furthest Jew from Jerusalem, the one who has no interest and doesn't think he's connected. Yet we don't want so-and-so to feel like they're going to miss out or they're going to get caught out of care and concern, interest for a fellow person who perhaps is much lower and less openly connected to Yerushalayim, to the Beis HaMikdash. We will all refrain from that which we need in order to look out for one another. This is Zayin Mar Cheshvan. In the later years, the Rebbe requested from anyone who was able to, anyone who had come to visit the Rebbe for Yom Tov, for Rosh Hashanah or for Sukkot, if they were able to, they should stay and not finish the Yom Tovim season until the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. It's a very big ask. For most people, it wasn't possible. I mean, it was hard enough to get away from home for a day, for a week, for Sukkot. To stay after that another 2 weeks, that's like really intense. Till Rosh Chodesh and until the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. Mainly it was the Bachram who would do that. But the Rebbe almost created an extension for the time of Tishrei, for the excitement and the festive season. And the season extended is exactly where we're at. And this is, in a way, the time that we're in now, where one could argue, okay, it's behind us. The festivities are done. We're back to the grind of real life. We've got to face reality. But in our generation, we know Zayin Mar Cheshvan is the Yom Tov of the people, looking out for each other. And in a way, we are so into it around the entire globe. We're coming together and looking out for one another and searching almost desperately for one more way and one more thing that I can do for somebody else. The question of what's in it for me is so on the back burner. We are so keen, and people at the drop of a hat would do anything to be of help and of service and of kindness to a fellow Yid who perhaps they've never met and maybe will never meet. But we know we're one people, and we'll celebrate and we'll rejoice and we'll choose to not think about the sadness of what's going on, and instead we'll choose to uplift and to talk up about how empowered and how encouraging we must be to each other and be to ourselves, how much we must be kind to our very own neshamas, and encourage ourselves to keep on doing the good things that we're doing and celebrate each achievement. And even if it's a moment that we need to give ourselves a breather, we encourage ourselves then too, because it's real. Am Yisrael Chai, and the Rebbeinu Shalom Atavach Hartana has chosen us, and it's given us the koyach to look out for each other, and we can do it. And that leads us straight into this week's Parshah, Parshas Noach, which is the second of the book. And Parshas Noach is full of these sorts of messages of upliftedness, starting off with, right at the beginning of the Parshah, when the world around Noach was so wicked. And Noach's told to build an ark, a teva, in which he will float and be saved from the evils of this world. And he doesn't do it in one day. He doesn't do it in 10 days. He builds the ark over 120 years. And why does it take so long? So that he can help and encourage anybody who is willing to listen. It doesn't stop him when nobody listens. He continues doing the right thing and following what he needed to do. And he built the entire teva. And Hashem commands him to bring in from every type of species of living beings, all creatures. That includes animals, wild animals, birds, reptiles, creepy crawlies. Each one of them should come in, and there should be a male and a female of each kind. Now, obviously, Noach on his own wouldn't have been able to figure out what the different species are, which one's the male and the female, and make sure there's two and no more, no less. But Hashem took care of that part. And Hashem arranged for them to come, and Noach was just in there to keep the law and order, if you like, and to bring aboard the correct amount of food and rations that would be needed inside, and to build up place. And then Hashem says to Noach, time is up, we've got to go. We've got to enter the teva. And there were people who said, if we see Noach going into the teva, we'll stand there with swords and hacks, and we'll beat him out of there, and we won't let him go in. And Hashem said, no. As clear as the day. Midday. In the middle of the day, Noach will enter the teva, and he did. When Hashem closes the door behind him, safe and sound, and it starts to rain. And it starts to rain light rain. And Hashem still hopes that they'll turn around. And Noach's times, they were too far gone, and they couldn't turn around. Later, we'll talk about what happens with the rainbow. But Noach sails on the seas, and it's not the seas because there are 40 days and 40 nights. Niftechu arubas hashamayim. The windows of heaven open up, and the waters from the deep come up, and the entire world, the inhabited world, that is, at least according to marriage, was flooded to the extent that nobody survived. Only Noach and those who were with him in the teva. And the water stayed for the best part of a year and slowly started to recede. And we read in this week's Parshah how Noach realized that it was receding, and he was waiting, itching to get out. And he sends out a bird, and he asks Hashem to have mercy on him. And he waits until he got one bird, the raven, and then the dove, and then the other dove. And eventually, the dove doesn't come back. And Noach knows the time is close, and he still asks Hashem. Of course, he doesn't exit the teva, the ark, before Hashem says so. He was under strict instructions by Hashem. But even though he knew the water was receding, and when the water was finally gone, Hashem said to Noach, now's the time to leave. When he comes out, Noach realizes that he has two animals and two birds of each kind. But there's certain ones that he has 7 sets. And these were the animals that were eventually going to become kosher animals. And Noach realizes the reason why he has extra sets must be so that he may be able to use them to show appreciation for Hashem. And he did what Adam did, and what Cain did, and Hevel did. He brought an offering to Hashem. It was a sign of gratitude. And Hashem responds to his gratefulness. He says, Noach, I'm going to make a promise, the rainbow promise. What's the rainbow promise? Never again will the entire world be destroyed like this, ever. It's a big statement to make. Imagine a parent says, I will never again punish my children. It's not a very good parenting move to make, to promise never to punish your children again. What happens if they need punishment? What happens if they need discipline? What are you going to do, Hashem? You're locking yourself in to never punish? And of course, Chassidus says, actually, the answer lies in the rainbow. The rainbow message. Why was it a rainbow promise of all promises? It was colorful. What did Hashem have with the rainbow? Chassidus will explain that Hashem invented the rainbow at that moment. It was the first time in world history that there was ever a rainbow. Because what is a rainbow? That the sunlight shines through the mist. Generally speaking, when it's very cloudy, you don't get a rainbow. When it's very sunny, you don't get a rainbow. The rainbow comes about when the sunlight shines through the thin mist. The mist is thin enough to be able to shine through, and the sunlight manages to penetrate, then you get a rainbow. Says Hashem to Noach, up until this point, those who were good were good. And those who were evil, it was so hard for them, almost impossible to turn around. And therefore, it was either sunlight or it was cloudy, dark. And when it was cloudy, it wasn't as light. And when it was light, it wasn't cloudy. But here comes the rainbow promise. Says Hashem to Noach, from now on, the rainbow will symbolize that even those who are struggling to get it right and are struggling to do the right thing will also be able to turn around the boat and sail back, be able to join in the return. The concept of Teshuvah was recreated at this stage. And that's why Hashem could say, there will never have to be a time where humanity will be beyond return. Because the rainbow promise. There will always be a way back. There will always be a way back. And that was a promise Hashem made to Noach. The story continues that Noach unfortunately planted a vineyard instead of planting stuff to grow, and eventually gets himself drunk and gets himself into a mess. And his son Cham with his grandson Canaan act inappropriately, and he curses them. And that eventually becomes why Canaan, who becomes the owner of the land of Eretz Yisrael, which belonged to Shem, Melchizedek Melech Shem, for many years, takes over Eretz Yisrael and makes it the land of Canaan. And eventually, the Yiddish people were told to take it back from him. But at this point also, Canaan and Cham were being cursed, also become their grandparents, who eventually was going to become Eliezer, Eved Avraham, who was told by Avraham, unfortunately, you cannot marry. His daughter will not be able to marry Yitzchak because they are from a family of cursed people, since Noach cursed them. We have later on the story of how Noach and his descendants then go forth to multiply and refill and re-inhabit the whole land. We also have the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the seventh of the seven Noahide laws, which are given to Noach now, that the change of creation. Up until this point, the human being was there to rectify and elevate the world to an extent. Which extent? Vegetation, plants, grains were allowed to be consumed and elevated through human consumption. Meat of an animal was forbidden. And now Hashem says to Noach, after he's come out of the ark, we've gone through such a change. It's become such a different world. It's become more refined. Oiske edot, more subtle, less coarse. And therefore, the human being now has the ability to elevate not just the vegetative kingdom, but also the animal kingdom as well. And from then on, the human being was allowed to consume animals, providing the seventh mitzvah, which was not to cause pain, or Evim Menachem. The end of the story is that later on, we have the story of the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is when the people of the world gathered together. It was still in Noach's lifetime. Avraham was already born. They gathered together to build a massive tower trying to fight Hashem. And the punishment was that Hashem dispersed them and brought down the tower and made them have different languages so they could not communicate. And here you have the end of the Parshah, where finally Avraham the young hero who was going to become the one who will champion and re-bring to the fore faith in Hashem and monotheism, was born. Avraham Avinu was born to Terach. Terach is Avraham's father, and that's how the parsha closes. How Avraham and Terach are living there, even they were in that time when he passed him until he moved. So this is the Parshas Noach, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of history packed in. Almost as many years as Bereshis, you were having Noach. Not quite, but almost. It's a lot of stories. And each one is layers upon layers of understanding. And we're going to try and take one area of this conversation, and we're going to zoom in on it, and we're looking for a practical, relevant message for us today. And I think this particular sikha is very empowering and extremely important to us in the times that we're living right now. Already from day one, people have been asking, where is Hashem? Where is Hashem? How can this be happening? And the question resurfaces every time one closes one's eyes and thinks back to what we've been exposed to, what people have experienced, what people are still experiencing this moment. And we ask ourselves, what's going on? And faith is not an easy thing. For some people, they look at faith as cheap. That's what kids have. Unsophisticated. Child play. A thinking person. Someone who's mature. Someone who has a little understanding, life experience, understands how things work. Faith doesn't belong. And what we're going to learn today is that actually we start off with childish faith. And we develop life experiences and understandings, rationale, ideas, and then we get back to faith. And although we start off with faith, which is before any sort of human intelligence, past human intelligence, we get right back to even deeper faith still. The faith that says that when we've asked the questions because we understand, and the questions are larger than any answer we can give, that's when a deeper level of faith surfaces, not a shallower level of faith. And that sort of progress of starting off with basic faith and then just studying and exploring and developing our understanding more and more, developing our feelings. How do I feel about that? Where does it make me? Where does it put me? And then eventually get into a deeper level of faith. That is so true. It's so deep, and it feels deep as well. This is what we want to explore, especially when it comes to this week's Parshah, this time of history, and this time of the year, where we're crossing from Yomim Tovim and festivities and highs, and it's fantastical, to all of a sudden, the plain and simple. And this year, the challenge of what the end of Yom Tovim is brought to us, the reality that we are in right now, and we're davening for Yeshua's immediately. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. We're starting off with a quote, which is quite a famous observation which Rashi makes. It's on the very opening psukim of this week's Parsha. The text reads in the Parsha, Noach ish tzaddik, tamim haya b'dor Yosef. Noach was a righteous man. He was perfect in his generation. And right away, Rashi notices, what does it mean? He was right, perfect in his generation. He was perfect. What's this generational idea? Says Rashi, note, actually quoting from Chazal from the Gemara, he was considered righteous relative to his generation. However, had he, Noach, lived in the generation of Avraham, he would not have been considered of any importance. He was righteous relative to his generation. So in a generation of gangsters, Noach was considered the righteous man. but put him next to Avraham, no, Avraham's really righteous. Noach was righteous for his generation. Let's just go back for a second. Based on this understanding, when the verse reads that Noach was a righteous man, he was perfect in his generation, is that a compliment? Or is that a half compliment and half derogatory remark? What do we say? So it would seem like it's a little bit of a compliment, but it's also a little bit of not so complimentary. What do we say?
We think that Noach needed God's help because he was from that generation, whereas Abraham didn't, because he had the learning and he had the piety already, but Noach didn't have that. So Noach had to have God's help.
Wow, that's already a deep concept. One second. Let's just unpack a little bit. We're saying that Noach was in a generation that required more support just to be upstanding. And therefore Hashem helped him. Compared to Avraham, who had the piety and the education, or he had the surroundings, and therefore he didn't need as much support. That itself tells us something right there. Yet Hashem helps us in our needs, whatever that may be. Hashem helps us relative to our needs. Fascinating idea. And Rashi actually brings that as a second commentary, as a different commentary. One shot is, as you just explained, that Noach, even in such a debased generation, still held his head high and kept his focus. What a compliment. Even in his generation, he was righteous. That's one way of understanding. And then there's the other way of understanding that we just read here. It was only relative to his generation. But actually, he maybe wasn't so righteous had you put him next to Avraham. And we want to focus on this for a second, just because, although it sounds derogatory, it actually carries a tremendous lesson. It's part of a 3-step analysis that will teach us how to be kind to ourselves and at the same time push ourselves to do more, to grow, to not get frustrated if things aren't as optimal as we were hoping or expecting from ourselves. Nonetheless, we keep on focusing on the next step, And this is the Noach, Avraham, Moshe analysis or messaging. Starting off with Noach being the righteous man of his generation. The question we're going to ask, though, and the way we're going to frame this is very interesting. We just said that Noach was righteous for his generation, but put him next to Abraham, he wouldn't be considered any importance. You know what the question is going to be? How many years are there between Noach and Abraham? Well, Noach was much, much older than Abraham. The problem is, although he was much older, they lived in the same time. They overlapped. So when we talk about Noach not being in the same generation of Abraham was 58 years old when Noach passed away. And for those of us who like gematria, let's do the gematria of 58. 50 is Nun, 8 is Ches, Nun Ches, Noach, Abraham. Abraham was Noach years old when Noach passed away. Abraham was 58, which is the numerical value of Noach. The name Noach is the exact amount of years of how many years their lives overlapped. Well, 58, not such a young boy. Abraham was 58 by the time Noach passes away. So they actually were in the same generation, at least in the same times. So what is it that we mean? That Abraham was so much more righteous than Noach, that had he been in the same time, he would be nothing if they weren't in the same time. So the short of the answer is going to be that we're not saying that had Avraham stood next to Noach, Noach would be unimportant. We're talking generation. Avraham's generation, Noach's generation. Or if we put it in different words, Noach's impact on his circle of influence compared to Avram's generation, the people that Avram influenced. So we're not about comparing who's better, my daddy or your daddy. No. That's not what it's about. We're not here to compare who's the better person, because each one of them had their own circumstances, own challenges, and own mission. And it's not about comparing who's the better and who's the worse, who did well, who didn't well. We're not the judge. We are learning is the generational impact that each one had to bring was progressively much greater what Noach's impact had on his generation. And what Avram's impact in his generation, the progression was clear that Avram was much more impactful and uplifting to his generation, and his righteousness lasts. So Avram's continued to improve the generation's righteousness until it exceeded Noach's righteousness. The people of Avram's times were impacted to be much better than Noach. Not only his generation, but Noach as well. Okay. Let's see it and let's unpack it the way it's inside. Here's how we have, starting off with the Noach history. And we're going to learn that actually Noach was also quite learned. Not only was he quite learned, he had a setup to create and protect his righteousness. Fascinating. We don't know much about those generations. I mean, even in the Torah, there's very little said relative to the amount of years about Noach. I mean, it's 2,000 years from creation till Avraham Avinu, and they are crammed into 2 parshas, compared to the book of Exodus that has an entire book about 1 year. 1 year. Or maybe 2 years. So the difference, not much information there, yet if we delve in and we extrapolate, we can find actually Noach wasn't a loner. He wasn't bereft of study, of intelligence, of depth. Noach had quite a setup. Actually, Noach already had 6 mitzvahs. 6 of the 7 Noahide laws were given to his great-great-great-great-grandfather Adam. And people knew them. God, this is from the Rambam in the History of Laws of Kings. God gave Adam 6 commandments: the prohibition against idolatry, blasphemy, murder, incest, adultery, and theft. And the positive command, the commandments to establish laws and courts of justice, these were all given to Adam. Now, good question. At the same time, Adam transmitted these teachings to Enoch to Chanoch, and Chanoch would have given it over to Mr. Shelach, and Mr. Shelach gave it over to Noach, and each one transmitted it to the next generation, and there was a chain of education from the beginning of time, from Adam, through to Noach, and Noach probably would have continued teaching his children as well. So it's not like there was no wisdom or perspective or pathways in which we were told to follow, yet. Nonetheless, says the Rambam, continues in the Laws of Idolatry, the history of our universe, Tzur Ha'olamim, the God of the eternal rock, was not recognized or known by anyone worldwide with very few exceptions, such as Chanoich, Mr. Shalach, Noach, Shem, and Ever, a very select chain that held on to it. The world continued this way all the way until the pillar of the world, our patriarch Abraham, was born. So for the best part of all these 20 generations, almost 2,000 years, very few people were interested in knowing about Hashem. And instead, they went to explore exciting things, spirits, energies. Imagine being able to see auras. Imagine being able to see into the stars and predicting almost what's coming. Would you still want to hold on to the straight and narrow? You could figure out ways to have fun and still stay clear. And more importantly, it was very, very rewarding and pleasurable to connect to all sorts of other ways, other sorts of spiritual connections, even though they were forbidden and idolatrous. And then it became a whole movement. And you had people who got caught up into paganism and the rest, but they actually experienced things. Until it came Avraham Avinu. And Avraham was only 3 years old when he realized there was something more to existence than idolatry, than creationism. Creations have to be created. They have to come from somewhere. And there must be something outside of creation. The way the Rambam explains this, after this mighty one, referring to Abraham, was weaned, young little kid, he began to explore and think. Though he was a child, he began to think day and night, wondering, how can the sphere revolve continually without anyone controlling it? Who causes it to rotate? It cannot turn itself. He had no teacher, nor was there anyone to inform him. He was married in Ur-Kasdim among foolish idolaters. His father, mother, and all the people around him were idol worshippers, and he would worship with them. However, his heart was exploring and gaining understanding because he started to think. The more he thought, the more he realized. Here's a midrash that describes the story of little Avraham. He observed the moon. Her light illuminated the night, shining from one end of the world to the other, and her retinue of glistening stars was enormous in number. He told himself, this is God. And he worshipped the moon all night. What a powerful being up there in the sky with the myriads and myriads of stars all around. Don't forget there was no street lights to darken the horizons. And there was probably no clouds back there where he was living, Macedonia. And he wasn't living in Manchester. And there he was watching this wonderful power in the sky. Oh, this is something outside of the entire creation, he thought. Then in the morning, he observed the rising sun's rays, and its light conquered the skies. The moon rapidly faded, weakening its strength. He told himself, the moon's light is but a reflection of the sun. Indeed, the entire world is sustained by the sun's radiance. He then worshipped the sun the entire day. Sun's much more powerful. But as evening fell, the sun set. Its strength steadily weakened until the moon, stars, and planets emerged. He declared, there must be a master, a God, over all of these too. These are part of creation. If the sun and the moon share the skies and are moving and don't stay in one place, there has to be something that's powerful, more powerful than both of them, that created the creation of each one of these, that is above and beyond even the matter which is outside of our planet, but still part of creation. It's still a part of the universe. And the universe is a creation and therefore must have a creator. And that's when, says the Rambam, back to the Rambam here, ultimately he mastered the path of truth and understood right from wrong through his accurate comprehension. He realized that there is one God who controls the sphere and creates everything, that there is no other God in all of existence. And he knew that all of humanity had erred. And this was true even though it was enticing to get involved in spirits and forces and draws of different impulses all around, which was clear and obvious to so many. But he understood that there must be an unmoved mover and an unseen creator, and this was only one piece of the puzzle. It now fell to Avram to figure out what God is. He thought and he thought for 37 years until he mastered the whole truth, from the young age of 3 till the age of 40, at which point the Rambam says Avram was 40 years old when he became aware of his creator, when he recognized and knew him. He began to formulate replies to the inhabitants of Ur-Kasdim and debate with them, telling them that they were not following the proper path. And he argued without them. He was unafraid, and he actually found meaning in explaining and discussing this with other people. He shattered their idols and began to debate and explain to the people of Macedonia that it's only proper to serve the God of the universe. To him alone is it fitting to bow, sacrifice, and offer libations, so that the people of future generations would recognize him. Think about all these sub-energies are tools in the hands of Hashem, but there is only one creator who is the creator of everything. Conversely, it's fitting to destroy and break all the idols of others from making the same errors as those that thought that there was no other God besides these idols. We have to help people realize that we're not allowed to get caught on these tools. This was Avraham Avinu. When Avraham Avinu eventually was told in next week's Parshah, he makes his way to Canaan in Israel. Avraham's followers took the ownership of the idea and internalized it, and this became Avraham's movement. And he won people over by debate, but not just by logical arguments. Rambam writes much more than that. When he comes to the land of Canaan, proclaiming God's existence, the Parshah states, and he called in the name of him, when the people would gather around him and ask him about the statements, he would explain it to each according to their understanding, until they turned to the path of truth. He would talk to people in words that they could relate to. It wasn't only about what they would say in an academy of philosophy. For the philosophers, he was there. He spoke philosophy. Somebody who wasn't into philosophy, somebody who was a practical type of person, or someone's analytical, or someone who do whatever it was. He spoke to people in a language that would work for them. Ultimately, thousands and myriads gathered around him. These are the men of the house of Abraham, in whose hearts he implanted this critical concept. He implanted the concept into their hearts. And this was Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu created recognition, allowed people to personally discover Hashem in a way that their heart spoke to it. Avraham implanted monotheism in their hearts. And that's why they're called the people of Avraham, because like him, they were switched on. They were on fire, passionate. Their hearts were full of a closeness to Hashem, their own personal journeys, one by one. In the words of the Sikha, the way it says it here in the Sikha here, their acceptance of Hashem was not just the product of Avram's defeating them in debate with resounding arguments, top-class debater, which, by the way, Avram loved debating. It's clear. He had a great time on the soapbox. He loved an opportunity to argue and explain and bring across his points, but that's not how he won people over. It was not even just because they agreed with Avram's intellectual explanation and proofs. In that case, it would mean that their acceptance of God was foreign to them, something Avram injected into them, superimposed. Instead, he didn't do it that way. He planted the recognition and knowledge of Hashem in their hearts. It became their recognition as it was Avram's recognition. Their mind embraced the truth of Hashem in their own way. At that point, it was appropriate to call them the generation of Avram. Not just people who studied from Avram, but people who had followed in his footsteps and were passionate. Like Avraham, they were permeated with recognition of Hashem. It was theirs. And that's what it means to be switched on. This was a generation that Avraham had educated, not just taught them what to say and answers to questions, but they knew it. They felt it in their hearts. And let's do that the way the Rambam writes this. Avraham taught it to Yitzchak, his son. Yitzchak also taught others and turned their hearts to Hashem. He also taught Yaakov and appointed him as a teacher. And Yaakov taught others and encouraged all who accompanied him. He also instructed all his children. And this movement gained the strength among the descendants of Jacob and those who joined them until a nation formed in the world that knew Hashem. Amazing. Avraham turned around. This was the generation of Avraham that Noach pales in comparison to. However, after an extended stay in Egypt, the Jews learned from the Egyptians and reverted to worshiping the stars as they did. And within a short time, the fundamental principle that Abraham had planted was nearly uprooted. The descendants of Jacob almost all returned to the errors of the world and its crookedness. Wow. What went wrong? How did that happen? In the short space of a few hundred years, Avram's storm and tremendous gift to the world was almost lost, uprooted, nearly uprooted, says the Rambam. How did it go wrong? What was the mistake and what was the missing link? And how can we make sure that doesn't happen to us? Enormous faith, such deeply rooted faith, where you have people in the face of anything and everything are holding on tight, and all of a sudden it starts to falter. What's going on? And we know what the answer is. The Rambam continues. Out of love for us and to uphold the oath Hashem made to Abraham, our patriarch, so out of recognition of our importance, out of the love he has for our great-grandfather Avraham Avinu, God gifted us and designated Moshe, our teacher, the master of all prophets, and sent Moshe to redeem us, the Jewish people. And after Moshe, our teacher, prophesied and God chose Israel as his inheritance, he crowned them with mitzvahs and taught them how to serve him, teaching them the rules prescribed for idol worshippers and those who stray after it. The answer to making sure that we don't fall into that trap was giving us God-given mitzvahs. We could sense that his commandments are just and faithful because he shared them with us from his perspective. He crowned us with them. He allowed us to wear his crown. That was the key. Let's unpack for a second, and then we'll do maybe one or two more texts. What we're saying here right now is that first there was Noach, and Noach studied, and he taught the next generation. And no one who wanted to hear could listen. And there weren't many, because the intellectual pursuits were less enticing than the emotional excitement of what the worldly glitz could offer. And then comes Avraham Avinu, and he doesn't just teach information, but he implants things into people's hearts. He helps people recognize passionately their own personal recognition. It's a whole new level, and that takes off like a rocket. And unfortunately, when the Jewish people end up in slavery, when all of a sudden there was questions they couldn't answer, all of a sudden they were faced with real challenges and they didn't know the answer to. Of course, in hindsight, we know Pesach. We can answer some of those questions. But they were living through and they didn't know. And their faith began to falter. So much so that it was at risk of getting lost and being uprooted completely. And then Hashem, in his great loving kindness to Avraham Avinu and to us, gave us the third link in the chain. Noach, Avraham, until finally Moshe brought us to Mount Sinai and taught us that our intellectual understanding of Hashem, our passionate, emotional, personal recognition of Hashem are so important, but we must wear Hashem's crown the way Hashem gives it to us. Or in the words of Chassidus, the words the Rabbi teaches us, not only because it makes sense to us, but that it makes sense to us that there's more to our faith than our own personal experience. There's more to the truth than we will ever understand. So that we started off with basic faith and studied it and developed into our own personal appreciation for Hashem, we cannot stop there. We then realize that however much we do know, we know enough to know that we don't know it all. We have enough track record, enough life experience to know that we don't have the answers to everything, but that doesn't change the truth. That's faith that is developed not instead of human experience and understanding. It's developed through human understanding. We then progress into a deeper level of faith still that will embrace Hashem even when we don't have the answers yet. And we have absolute confidence that we will do the next right thing and the answers are there. That's Moshe Rabbeinu giving us the gift of Torah, a mitzvah from Hashem, a God-given commandment. Let's put it in the text, and then we'll do a little mashal. Hopefully we'll still squeeze it in when the time clock's ticking. Let's do a little text. There we go. This is from the Sicha and Chelachaf. We must know that we cannot rely on ourselves or build our relationship with Hashem on our cognition. Our minds cannot be our only bulwark against the idol worship, nor can they be our only reason to embrace and serve Hashem. They're important, key players, but they cannot be the only measure and the compass. To shield them from the sin of idol worship, our ancestors required a key factor, which is that God, out of love for us, designated Moshe, our teacher, the master of all prophets, and sent him to redeem the Jews. He, that's God, crowned them with mitzvahs and taught them how to serve him. Hashem teaches us more than we can ever get. This means that they served God because God had commanded them to. Not only was there acknowledgement of Hashem inspired by Hashem himself, but so was the worship of Hashem. Unlike in Abraham's day, when they worshiped God because they learned that God is the only one worthy of worship, and it made sense to them personally. And that is the proper to straight for him, or this offer sacrifices and pour libation to him, etc. That's true, but it's more than just that. It's more than just that. Oh, I get it. I get that there's more to than what I get. The secret Jewish endurance is to know that we worship Hashem because he instructed it when he prophesied to Moshe and taught us how to serve him. Hashem taught us more than we can figure out on our own. Our knowledge of Hashem doesn't suffice in so much as our convictions are compelled by our intelligence. We can only reach the dimension of God that extends downwards to relate to us. However, our minds can't grasp or reach the pinnacle of godliness that transcends any form. And this becomes the message for us. We know that there is so much around this world that demonstrates that Hashem is in charge. There's so much going on that is absolute kindness and goodness of Hashem around us. We understand that. And we see that. And then there's times and areas that, hold on a second, something doesn't stack up. But we remember that although we have intelligence and passionate emotional connection to Hashem, on top of that, we have even deeper still, a strong sense of faith in Hashem. And nothing can pull me away from if my perception of God is rooted in God's perspective. And this is what we are learning from Hashem telling us that Noach doesn't compare to Avraham, and equally, Avraham is only step 2. Moshe takes it to the whole new level. The truth is that faith is the absence of knowledge. Where you step into uncertainty, you tap into faith. Let's do the mashal. When somebody asks you, do you understand quantum physics? If you ask me, I don't know about anyone else on this call, but if you ask me, the answer is no, I don't. I'm honest. I don't know the slightest thing about quantum physics. But guess what? If you ask Mr. Albert Einstein, do you understand quantum physics? Guess what he'll answer? He's not around, but what he would have answered. He would have said also, no, we don't really understand quantum physics. It's that thing that you can't really get your head around. Now, let me ask you, when he says he doesn't understand, and I say I don't understand, is that the same I don't understand? Of course not. I don't understand because I haven't learned the little thing and nothing about it. Well, Mr. Einstein has learned a very lot about it, and therefore he appreciates that he knows a lot about it that helps him realize that it's much greater than his understanding. So is faith just because I haven't started to think yet? Also, but that's the beginning. And then I need to develop to start understanding and personally relate and connect with the Almighty Eibishter and notice how he's involved in every area of my life, in every area of creation, the enormous kindness and involvedness. That's a word, we just made it up. But involvedness in every single part, the most minute part of my life, of the life around me, of the world at large. And then, all of a sudden, there's uncertainty. And that's where faith is a much deeper faith. And that's the deep faith that Moshe Rabbeinu gifted to us. We learn it in this week's Parshah. Noach was a tzaddik b'doirei sof. There was a reason why we started off with Noach and then evolved into Avraham and then evolved into Moshe. Hashem didn't start us off with Moshe Rabbeinu's faith, because we also have the same thing. We start off with Noach in his generation and in his step, and then all of a sudden we manage to dig deeper, hopefully for joyous occasions, and then dig deeper still and discover who we really are, chosen by Hashem. Atav v'chartanu mikol ha'am, ahavta isanu, treasured and beloved people. V'rimamtanu mikol hashenes, elevated to enormous responsibility, and that responsibility is to make these choices today, to choose to be joyous, to choose to be hold our head up high, to reach out to one another and to reach out to the world around us and be shining lights that will continue to bring goodness around our direct circle of influence and equally to our spiritual circle of influence, which is every other human being on this planet, and certainly our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land of Yisrael. May Hashem protect them and grant them all the Hatzlacha, Nechama and Yeshua, and refuahs that everyone needs. With Hashem's help, we should see Noach and Avraham and Moshe and our Rebbeim in Yerushalayim HaKodesh tonight. Before we can hear anything else, Meir Yemeinu, thank you very much for joining with the strongest prayers for Mashiach now. Seid gesund, everybody, and Mesuras Tovos.